Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of big data. Today, my guest is from 1010 Data. We have the CEO of the company, Sandy Steier. Welcome to the show today.
Thank you very much for having me.
Hey Sandy, appreciate you coming on. You know, I've got your slides up here. Why don't we start with that, and we'll follow it with a Q&A.
Great. Well, in the case of the slideshow, I'd like to just take 2 or 3 slides just to sort of give people a brief overview of 1010 Data and what kind of company we are. But then I'd like to launch into what's really interesting, and that is the space in which we play, because I think it's an unusual space. And I think that is really sort of much more interesting than the nitty-gritty about the company itself. So let me go, but as a CEO, I need to talk about the company, so let me do that. We have been around for a while. We are not a startup. In fact, we were founded in the year 2000, so that's ages ago in internet time. We have been profitable for quite a number of years. In that sense, we are also not a startup. We have over 275 customers, and most of those customers are household names. And we are a service that manages data for those customers, and at this point we have over 8 trillion rows under management. So that's quite a bit of data. I think that by any measure that is big data. The next slide just shows some of our customers, a very small selection. On the next slide, I would just introduce sort of the space in which we play, but I wanted to define the space a little bit better in the rest of this presentation. So on a very high level, we have a simple but comprehensive approach to the whole question of data and big data. We cover analytics, and analytics on structured data, network graph data, machine data, even text data, after it's been modified a bit. So we really do cover the gamut of the data spectrum. We do enterprise data warehousing, and which is primarily used for operational reporting. And we do data monetization, which I think is something that is much newer and much more interesting. And that's, in fact, where I'm going to be spending most of the rest of this presentation. So in order to introduce the concept and the sort of the space in which we play, because it is an unusual space, and I don't think it is well known or very familiar to people, I'm going to do it in a somewhat playful way. And I'm going to ask the rhetorical question, rhetorical because I doubt anyone in the audience can actually yell loud enough for me to hear. What is the biggest big data? Everybody talks about big data, but what is the biggest big data? And it is, and as we'll see, it is not such a academic question. When it comes to questions about the data, one could ask, is it, in terms of what is the biggest data? It could be financial data, maybe mobile telecom data, that's very big. Science data is big. Econometric data, social data, we all know about Facebook and how much data they have. Network and machine data is enormous. What is the biggest? And this is, again, it isn't just an academic question. There's a point here. I would say that the biggest data is all of the world's data. Now, you might say that is that really a valid thing to say? After all, can you really look at all the data, all the types of data at least, and do something with it all? Isn't it that one particular data set is useful for certain applications and other data is useful for other applications? And is it even practical to consider using all the data? Is that even possible from a technology perspective? And I would say that given a smart data scientist and giving that data scientist access to all the different types of data, that person will undoubtedly come up with interesting uses for that data that you or I or any of us haven't thought of yet. I think that especially given the motivation of making money for the company and other motivations, perhaps more altruistic, whatever the motivation the person has, if they have a particular mission and they have access to a lot of data that they hadn't had access to before, they will find value in that data. So again, there's a technology leap as to how one can do this, but certainly it makes sense that such a thing should be possible. This isn't just a pie in the sky idea. This is actually happening now. We have I have intimate experience with this. There are hundreds of so-called CPG companies, that's consumer packaged goods companies. Those are the companies that make all the stuff that we buy in stores, like Procter & Gamble and Coca-Cola and Pepsi and all the others. They are currently, even as we speak, analyzing the detailed data from retailers like Dollar General and Rite Aid, and those are both very large retailers that have enormous amounts of data. They have tens of billions of rows of data. The companies in the middle of this slide are actively analyzing all the detailed data from those retailers, mixing it together with econometric and demographic data, weather data, various kinds of geographic data, and trying to better understand their markets and figure out how to better sell product. This idea of getting at all this different kinds of data is a very good idea. I think few people would disagree with it, but there are obviously technical hurdles as to how this can actually be accomplished. So how can it be accomplished? So let's, for example, assume that two companies wanted to, share data with each other, two organizations, perhaps two enterprises. One possible way of these two organizations or enterprises sharing data is by establishing a direct link from one company to the other company's database and vice versa. But that's kind of this type of one-to-one thing is very difficult to accomplish and replicate across the spectrum of companies, and you really have to know what you're doing in order to attach yourself to another company's data set. A better way to do it would be for each company to put their data into common ground, like the cloud. But the question remains then, how do they actually use the data once it's in the cloud? So it's one thing for a company to put the data in there. It's quite another for other companies to actually make sense of that data and be able to manipulate it and research it. So I would suggest that one great way of looking at data, one great way of exploring data and really doing whatever you want with it is to use something like a spreadsheet. Spreadsheets are really good in that they are user-friendly. They are visual, which gives people a very good feel for the data. They're able to actually see it. There's a certain intimacy that is provided. They are interactive, which again causes intimacy. You don't run things in a spreadsheet. You don't submit jobs. You do things. You add two columns, and then you see the result. And then you do something else, and you see the result. And it's very friendly in that way. And they're unguided in the sense that they're not designed for a particular kind of analysis. You can do any analysis you want in a spreadsheet. So giving data in a spreadsheet, people can really do whatever they want with it. They can analyze it in new ways and come up with new uses for the data that perhaps other people have not thought of. But of course, spreadsheets are limited. Spreadsheets can handle only tiny amounts of data. But suppose that was not the case. Suppose that spreadsheets in the cloud could work on unlimited amounts of data. In this case, one company, or in our case enterprise, could put its data into the cloud, and that could be viewed by the other company through a spreadsheet-like interface, and that other company could figure out whatever they'd like to do with that data in a very original way. And vice versa, they can reciprocate by having the other company put its data in the cloud and have it be used by the first company, again through a spreadsheet-like interface. So this allows a very clean way, a very open way, a very unscripted way for companies to work with each other. Given this type of architecture, if a company could put its data in the cloud and that data can be used by somebody else, well, the company that put the data in the cloud to begin with could also use the data in the cloud. It could use its own data in the cloud and do its own analysis on its own data. It's kind of a small subset case of the larger case. Well, that is the purpose of a data warehouse. The purpose of a data warehouse is for a company to put its data someplace that it can then use it for analysis and reporting. But that is exactly what we're talking about. So this scheme actually covers the whole notion of data warehousing as well. If both companies' data is in the cloud and they're in the same place, then they can be mashed up with each other so that they can be joined together, and you can do a joint analysis between various data sets. And in this case, we're only showing two companies, but clearly there could be any number of companies participating, and the data could be mashed up among all the different companies. With this scheme, we've covered a lot of ground. We've covered a lot of the way data gets used in this world. We've covered analytics, including data mashups. We've covered data warehousing, and I should say that if you want to use BI tools like dashboards and stuff in this scheme, that's possible. It just means that those tools need to be able to talk to these spreadsheet-like things, and that is certainly easily doable. These spreadsheet-like things can appear to be a database to people if that is required. And then finally, we do data monetization, because one company, if they put their data in the cloud and other companies use it, they have every right to charge for it. And so this is a new revenue stream for companies. This is what 1010 Data does. We have essentially an unlimited size spreadsheet or series of spreadsheets in the cloud. This is actually the idea that we had way back in 2000. There was no word cloud then. There was no word the phrase big data didn't exist. Analytics was very, very new. But that is what we were doing starting in 2000. And it's a very different approach to the whole notion of data warehousing and data analysis. We are beginning to get traction, as you can tell from the number of customers that we have. And I think the trend in the marketplace with the whole big data trend, the cloud trend, and they really come together in 1010 Data, I think that is helping us as well.
Well, thanks for that, Sandy. So a couple of questions here. When we talk about enterprises and their databases, those are like the crown jewels, right? That's the stuff that they monetize. Is there friction when you talk about sharing it in a cloud with other companies?
Well, obviously, it depends on the data. If one company has data about individuals that include things like social security numbers and salaries and things that people don't want other people to know about, that data has to be kept under wraps, at least unless it is anonymized or perhaps aggregated or summarized in some way. So that is something that companies should be sensitive to. And there are laws about that sort of thing as well. But, and then of course companies may not want competitors to see too much of their data. But outside of that, there are enormous opportunities to share data, and I would argue that any company that collects a lot of data, that data should be interesting to people in other industries, in other places, in ways that we maybe had not even thought of. Telecom data, for instance, is very interesting to people. Telecoms have information about who knows whom. And again, even on an anonymous basis, that kind of understanding the sort of the landscape, the human landscape, is a very useful thing to know. And with respect to your question, if a company can get something out of sharing its data, no company is going to share its data for free, essentially. But if there is a quid pro quo, the most obvious being money. But it doesn't have to be money. Maybe if I share data with you, you'll share data with me, and between the two of us, we'll make both of our businesses better. That's a motivation as well.
So could you give us an example? I've seen a lot of familiar those CPG companies you talked about. Like, are we talking about how Walmart might decide to share its data with Coca-Cola and vice versa for mutual benefit?
Well, again, I think the example that I showed is a very good example of that. A company like Dollar General. Dollar General, for those who don't know, is the largest retailer in the United States by store count. They have over 10,000 stores and are growing and doing well. They have a symbiotic relationship with the CPG companies, and it goes beyond the fact that obviously they buy stuff from them so that they can sell to consumers. That's an obvious relationship, but there are other relationships. Even historically, it's been true that retailers are somewhat less sophisticated analytically. It's just a fact. The CPG companies are often quite sophisticated. Procter & Gamble is known as being very sophisticated, but there are many others. And so the retailers look to the CPG companies for advice. How to stock their shelves, how to do promotions, what products to sell to whom, under what circumstances. Because the retail, obviously, the advice they're going to get from a CPG company is somewhat biased towards that CPG company's products, but the retailer ultimately just wants to sell product, and they don't care whose product they sell. That may be a somewhat, general thing to say, but I think that that's largely the case. And so there is a symbiotic relationship in the sense that the retailer gets advice from the CPG company, and the more information the CPG company has about what's going on in the retailer and in the market, the better advice they will get. And of course, then there's the money angle, which I think would be it would be foolish to ignore. Retailers, like anyone else, are always looking for new revenue sources, and retail is a tough market, very tight margins, and the more revenue they can get, the better.
Oh, I should have asked you, Sandy. I mean, how do people engage with you? Is this something they can kick the tires on? So let me step back.
Oh, the answer is absolutely yes.
Yeah, yeah. So
yes, it's very easy for them. Invariably, that is what happens. The customer will send us data. In fact, using the example of Dollar General or Rite Aid or pretty much anybody else up there, they sent us all their data before they even said that they were interested in using us, or certainly before we had a contract signed. And we put the whole thing up because, again, I had to move fast here because I don't want to take up too much of the audience's time, but this is a spreadsheet not only in the way it's spreadsheet-like, not only in the way it's used, but in how data gets into it. When you put data into a spreadsheet, you just load it in, right? There's no design discussions and ETL discussions and data integration complexity. You just take the data and you stick it into the spreadsheet. That is essentially what we do with data. It's not quite as simple, but it's something like that. So we can put up large amounts of data very quickly. If you gave us, 10 billion rows of data that we had never seen before, we could have it up in a few hours. By tomorrow, you could be seeing it on the web, through our browser-based our browser interface, and you could be manipulating it. So it's actually very easy for us to sort of do, proofs of concepts, if you will. In many cases for free. We're trying to get away from that, but
yeah, terrific. Well, Sandy, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today and telling us more about 1010 Data.
I appreciate your having me.
You bet. Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on the world of big data.